Hi Sam, thanks for joining me today. Really excited to have a bit of a chat to you. I believe your background, you were head of diversity and inclusion at Westpac. You started one of the first, or the bank's first diversity and inclusion program. You're currently working at Microsoft, and you've got your own diversity and inclusion business where you advise companies. So I'm very keen to sit down and have a bit of a chat to you on World Autism Awareness Month. So thanks for joining me.
Thanks for
Um,
having me.
yeah, so can you talk me through some of those early days where you're sort of talking to the management team about an autistic hiring program and sort of how it was seen and how it all came about?
Yeah, sure. It was definitely a program that had been talked about and was kind of, I guess, in genesis before I came into the role and had kind of been shelved. And so I think most of the people that were driving, I guess, the idea around hiring people on the spectrum was very grassroots employee led. So we had a disability employee resource group that were really kind of spearheading that, and it was definitely pushed to one side for a time, and it was definitely something that I'd had a few meetings with the disability employee resource group and also the executive sponsor of that group, who was a pretty amazing exec at the time, about then sort of like reigniting it and getting it off the ground. So, and the reason I gotta kind of give that context is like sometimes these things do take some time, and absolutely a lot of the time they do start from grassroots employee action, which is really awesome. Um, what we ended up doing with it was, I guess it went through a number of iterations. I hired a program manager to support me and the team in terms of getting the program off the ground. An excellent human named Rachel Ranton, who's now off doing other things. And the reason that I hired a program manager was very deliberate. It was to have a key source of interaction and communication, but also someone who didn't have a lived experience or a connection to someone with autism. And the reason for that was really to have the most objective lens possible. Because as we all know, there are just so many different, people on the spectrum and people with autism, however they identify, are as individual as the individuals. And so wanting to make sure that we were as inclusive and as accessible as possible. And we did a whole bunch of research on different programs that currently existed. So we designed the program in one particular way. We got about halfway through that program design, and Rachel and I had a moment where we were like, we need to do this differently. And the art moment was around, we don't want to just create employment. We want to create employment and career pathways. So I think what we had been really good at as a bunch of corporates up until that point was employing people. And that's absolutely great because we know that the employment stats for people in this particular demographic, but also just people with a disability more broadly, is woeful in this country. But we also wanted to make sure that it was a career. So, and that we weren't just looking at IT roles, we weren't just looking at data analysis. We were trying to create banking. It was the first program in financial services. And we were trying to create, I guess, pathways in banking and I guess non-traditional roles in the sense of where we had research that people, with autism had been placed in the past.
Yeah, okay. So how did you think about support for those people as they were traveling through roles in that situation?
Really high touch. So we kind of flipped recruitment on its head, and it was a real change in the way that people leaders or hiring managers thought about recruitment as well, because what we basically asked was for 10 roles. So we started small as a pilot, and a few things that happened with those 10 roles. One was that we trained the hiring managers, the people leaders, but also the teams in awareness training in terms of increasing their knowledge around inclusion. We also asked the people leaders to really put their hand up and say, I want an intern,
Mhm.
but I don't have any say in who that is. So like non-traditional interview methods, and it's a real, like, it makes people uncomfortable, right? You're like, we will place the best candidate for the fit of your team. You have to trust us. And we
Wow.
know that, trust in corporate culture don't always go hand in
And
hand. So
particularly in a bank, I would have thought
absolutely. So
yeah.
we did a few assessment days where the candidates came in and did all sorts of different tasks, and there were no one-on-one interviews. And absolutely, we had candidates who presented to us who were not suitable, and I think that's really important. To also remember, like, you are going to have candidates who are not suitable for particular environments, and that's okay. Like, it's about also working with the recruiter, but also working with the human around, this is not the particular environment for you, but then here are some other pathways. And I think it's really important to be honest about that. And we also made sure that those people managers were spread throughout the bank. So we had some in institutional bank, we had some in obviously technology, but we really tried to sort of also figure out what would be achievable, and they're real roles. We didn't make up roles. We also didn't put all of our people in one team, which I understand works for some organizations, but we wanted to do this differently. And the other thing that we did was we created a community. So we had monthly check-ins. We'd get people to come in and speak. We'd get people to talk about how they were feeling, what they were coming up against. And so you really created a cohort of 10 humans who were really in the journey together, and really in, I guess, their experience together. Out of the 10, 8 went on to be placed permanently and to find permanent roles with the bank. And actually, I can sum it up by using one of the humans' words. Like, she said to me, Sam, I had a role at a university like for 15 years, and it was a great job, and I really enjoyed it. But it was just a job. And she said, this program for me, for the first time, I feel, and I'm getting all emotional, I feel like I have a career.
Wow.
And
Oh,
that's
it's amazing.
why we did it the way that we did it.
Yeah.
It is high touch, it is high engagement, it is high cost. But also we wanted to pilot it, we wanted to give it a go. And I was just lucky, I think, in a lot of ways. I mean, A, I'm very determined, but also B, I had the ear of a couple of executives who were also really passionate. So one of our execs at the time had a son, like a personal connection, and one of the other execs and those two kind of bankrolled the program, really had, either a strong personal connection or just a strong sense of being a really good human.
I guess, that was 2017 when you were working through that project. So kind of a good 5 years ago. I guess one of the things that interests me is, do you think attitudes towards neurodiverse hires over the last 5 years has really changed in Australia, or how would you see that?
I think the dialogue has changed, and I think, one of the things that was really important to me, like, we weren't employing a special population because it was the right thing to do, like gross and paternalistic. It was a talent play. It's like, why would you not want these amazing humans and these amazing minds in your organization? Like, it's a no-brainer. And people who are literally, like, hardwired to think differently, to someone like myself. I think the dialogue has changed. I think there's a little bit of a danger, to be honest, Jonathan, about it kind of being a fad, in the sense that people are well-intentioned and they want to create, programs for, humans who are on the spectrum without necessarily temperature checking their culture. And I think this goes for any diverse group or any kind of underrepresented population. It's one thing to bring, diverse humans in the door. It's another thing for them to feel safe and included, psychologically safe, and like they belong. And so I think, definitely the temperature has changed on recognition, that, people on the spectrum really absolutely, contribute in so many ways, to the organisation. Incredible. I think we still have a long way to go in terms of creating meaningful pathways, changing our recruitment processes. I still see people who have to go through, 3 interviews and like XYZ question. And so I just think that, for me, we need to change the whole system, rather than just changing one aspect. So it's kind of a really long way of answering your question, in the sense of absolutely, I think that the dialogue has changed. I think the temperature around it being a talent acquisition play has changed. I just think we have a long way to go in terms of creating cultures where people really feel, and this is everyone, right? But especially, underrepresented peeps, that they belong in those organisations and that we retain them.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. We work a lot through hackathons and skill-based hiring and those sorts of things to sort of get around some of those issues that you're talking about, just to understand how people react and how they sort of, how we can bring out the best without a traditional interview process. So, look, do you think, just moving on that topic, I guess, do you think there's some simple things that businesses across Australia could do to improve to be more inclusive?
Absolutely. I think we forget that humans are designed to relate to each other. We are social beings. And I think for me, it's those questions up front. I think there's probably a few things in that upfront piece. How are you designing your job descriptions? So that they are inclusive of all humans, right? Like regardless of gender, regardless of ability, neurodiversity, all of those types of things. I think that's kind of the first piece. And really, it's not that hard. I think the second thing is when people are in organisations, and we have neurodiverse people in our organisations, we don't need a special program, to hire people. And that was one of my trepidations, to be honest, about creating it. I was like, do we really need a special program? But in terms of creating that impetus for change and that, opportunity, like ideally what I would love to see is that people who are neurodiverse go through any type of hiring process, and get the job based on their skills and abilities. We've just got a little bit of a way to go. So I think for me, it's like if I'm a hiring manager and, someone's presenting to me or I'm interviewing someone, it's really those simple questions of what do you need to feel safe and supported in this interview? And just asking those questions up front, like rather than saying what accessibility do you need, it's like, is an interview the best way for us to, assess your skills and abilities? Is there, would you like to do it another way? And I'm sure, like, people are creative, right? Like someone sent me a podcast, as their interview. And so I think and like, it sounds like it's out there, right? But I kind of think, like, I think at the outset, be open, like be really open, ask people what they need. And even just in the work environment, what's the quality of the conversation that you're having with your people? What do you need? Like, what support do you need to be able to do your best in this environment? And for some people, it's absolutely going to be a quiet space. For some people, it's going to be headphones in a noisy environment. But, like we kind of said at the outset, everyone's an individual and everyone's different. I like a quiet space, and so I think it's when you get better at inclusion, with a particular population, you get better at inclusion for everyone.
Yeah.
So how are you having those conversations with all of your team? Like, what support do you need? How can I make the work environment, safer and more comfortable for you? And creating that space where, people can tell you what they need, what they don't need, what's working for them. And it's very easy to say. I just think for me, as an individual, as a leader, really it's just about what's one inclusive thing that I'm going to focus on with my team for the next week, month, year. Like, what's one, because we can all be better at it, and that's just the joy and the beauty of inclusion.
Absolutely. I think it's something that we all need to be conscious of, to get that improvement through. Having sort of championed inclusion for some time now, you would have seen inclusive teams develop and grow. What are some of the have you seen some really outstanding outcomes from some of the teams that you've put together that are sort of very inclusive, I suppose, or very diverse?
I think, look, for me, it's two things. It's about intention and it's about self-education. So I think one of the things that we do a lot in Australia in particular, we rely on people who are either from an underrepresented group or from a unique population to educate us about their needs, their uniqueness, etc. Where I see really amazing leaders is where there's an effort to educate yourself. So how do you diversify your thought, your world, and we have like literally no excuses. We have so many forms of technology, TED Talks, podcasts, books, like all of the things available to us. And the example that I use is when I first took on that head of inclusion and diversity role at Westpac. It was really my first kind of, work foray outside of, doing it volunteer on the side. I'm a kid who grew up, learning about the names of the first fleet ships, in Australia. Whereas actually what I should have been learning and what I wanted to learn was about First Nations culture. What land did I grow up on? What were the totems of my area? And so I guess for me, there was a really steep learning curve in terms of how does First Nations trauma show up in the workplace? How do we make sure that we're creating, safe, culturally sensitive and culturally inclusive environments for everyone? And the same with disability, like I'm a very able-bodied human. How does accessibility needs show up in a workplace? What does that mean for inclusion? And so for me, it was about reading, educating myself as a leader. Who do you mentor that's not like you? Who do you sponsor that doesn't look like you? Because we're all hardwired to mentor mini-me's. And so I think for me, the difference that I see in really inclusive teams and those that are either struggling or non-inclusive is the commitment of the leader, but also the commitment of every individual in that team, because you are only as inclusive as your squeaky wheel, and when we make exceptions for people, when we say, oh, that's just Julie, she's just like that, she's been here forever, or, that's just George, don't worry about him, we just kind of let him get away with that. You're only as inclusive as that human. And so I think for me, where do I see it work well? People that are, recognizing that they're individuals in a team, that everyone is responsible for inclusion, and that there's some self-education and that's available to people, and really intention, like you can smell if someone intends to include you or not, and you can smell you can tell if someone's intention is good, and positive and inclusive.
Yeah. So, look, just finally, I'm just conscious we're close to time here. So, it is World Autism Awareness Month, and I'm just keen to understand, is there anything that you're doing to celebrate during the month?
So at Microsoft, we have a series of, again, like education and celebration sessions here in the company. We have an employee resource group that is responsible for pulling all of that together. And I guess I'm very lucky. We have we have the power of Microsoft, and we get to tag team on all of the stuff that's happening in the US, which is pretty cool. Me personally, it's really simple for me, actually, Jonathan. It's checking in on all of the people that I know who are on the spectrum or identify as having autism, and just checking in. How you doing this month?
Hey.
Do you need any support? Do you need any help? Do you want to have a catch up? And so for me, it's really individual.
Yeah, look, and that's perfect. Yeah, Sam, look, you've been fantastic and generous with your time today, and I just wanted to say a thank you from us at Autocon, and look forward to keeping the conversation going and chatting to you again soon.
Thanks so much for having me, Jonathan, and happy Autism Awareness Month.
Thank you very much, and same to you.